Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we are going to be talking about the new Chinese alliance, if you will. That's what most people have been calling it. It's not necessarily a alliance on paper in terms of like what most people would traditionally think of an alliance as. You know, when people think like, oh, what's an alliance? Typically they think of like a NATO kind of situation where all these countries kind of band together and become extremely close allies, you know, shared military interests and whatnot. But this isn't necessarily exactly 1,000,000% to the definition what's going on with the Chinese-led BRICS alliance, but it's essentially an alliance, right? Like, this is a grouping of countries that are openly trying to now challenge American superiority globally. These countries have extremely common goals and interests in a lot of different places, right? Like, they definitely have their differences along the way too. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, but there's definitely a lot of similarities with these countries too. And this is something that you probably have heard a little bit about. Like, if you've been keeping up with the news and you've been keeping up with like everything going on, especially between like the United States and China, you know, the geopolitical situation there, you probably have heard the term BRICS, spelled B-R-I-C-S, okay? Now, this is a new quote-unquote alliance or world order that people have been calling, right? And essentially this is a partnership that is led by 5 leading economies globally, those being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and of course, South Africa. That's where the acronym comes together. But as of now, BRICS looks like it's got its eyes intent on expanding, as multiple nations have actually now began the process of applying for membership in BRICS, and it's leading to, well, no pun intended, but a lot of Americans especially shitting BRICS. So the worry is, obviously, especially here in the West, that BRICS will continue to gain influence, they'll continue to gain members of different countries, they will eventually continue to make up more and more of the share of the global economic and military order, and that eventually BRICS will evolve into a alliance that more or less is able to challenge and compete with US-led dominance of the West around the globe. Now, of course, Americans are not looking too kindly at this whole BRICS thing because it is a direct challenge to the American world order. Now, obviously, here in the United States, I think we overlook this a lot, but the United States truly has a absurd amount of power globally. And, you know, people say, oh, America's collapsing, you know, it's the fall of the empire and shit, but ultimately, dude, there is no military on the planet that is currently more powerful than the United States, regardless of what people say. The United States still has the dominant global economy, and on top of that, the US dollar is still the dominant reserve currency around the rest of the planet. So America is currently sitting pretty, in a way, right? Kind of at the top of the throne, top of the pecking order, if you will. But with BRICS expanding and expanding and expanding and getting these new countries submitting their membership requests, right, there's a lot of concern that that leading of the United States is eventually going to start to decay. So within the last few hours, the news has broken that 19 new countries have submitted membership requests to join BRICS. And with that, of course, you know, that's significant. 19 new countries are attempting to, you know, submit membership requests, right? There's definitely a lot of worry that people have about, oh, what exactly is going to happen next? You know, is this really the beginning of the end for America and whatnot here? And, you know, at the end of the day, right, like, you got to think about it like this, for me, right? America has been in control for a very long time, right? They've been, you know, the top dog for a very long time. Even during the Cold War, you know, the battle with the Soviet Union as superpowers, the United States has definitely been a dominant force on the planet for decades now. And eventually all these things come to end. A lot of people believe this is really the end of everything here. So I've been reading about this, right, for a while, and I've been planning on making a video kind of like this, talking about this for a while, but I'm actually glad I held off because of the news of these 19 countries trying to join. Now let's go ahead and talk about that. So essentially these BRICS nations are working to more or less destabilize the power of the US dollar. So as it stands, the US dollar is the dominant currency on the planet, right? You know, most reserves are backed by the US dollar. The US dollar accounts for a significant portion of global trade. The US dollar is currently like the currency that everyone really kind of defaults back to. But if China continues with its allies in Russia and whatnot to build this more or less economic alliance and BRICS up, that's going to challenge that status of the US dollar internationally, if you will, because let's say that, you know, BRICS accepts all of these 19 19 new member states that are applying, right? That would be a total of, what, like 25 or so countries that are economically aligning themselves against the US dollar. And this isn't including just, like Micronesia and Sudan and just like random countries, right? I mean, Russia's a pretty major player in the world. China is the biggest threat to the United States. India is one of the largest, most powerful countries on the planet as well. It's also developing very quickly. These countries, they don't want to be as dependent on the United States. And I mean, to a certain extent, can you blame them, right? The US has definitely fucked up a lot over, its control with things. But of course, the United States isn't going to sit around and just let this happen. I think that's where the misconceptions are really coming in. When people read about, the BRICS alliance and they read about what's coming next and all new member states and China's building up this alliance, right? They sit here and they worry like, oh, this is the downfall of everything, right? And I understand why people get scared like that. I understand why people think like, oh, this is horrible for America, because realistically it is. But keep in mind, the United States also is planning to stop this expansion in some way, right? Like, this goes directly against American interests. And if you know anything historically about going against American interests, especially when it comes to financial interests, that doesn't typically go over well. Now, how many countries has the US destabilized entire regimes in, or invaded, or financially collapsed because they didn't submit to US influence? I mean, if we're being real right now with all these BRICS countries, there's a CIA agent at a desk in the fucking headquarters somewhere that's planning something for every single one of these countries. And I hate to say that, I hate to, prop that up and everything, but that's just the reality of the situation here. I mean, do people really think that America's gonna sit around and just be like, yeah, just, replace us as the dominant reserve currency in the world, destabilize our power globally? We love that. Of course that's not gonna go over well, right? Now, the question is, can and will the United States be able to do something about it before it gets too rough, right? Like, are they going to be able to handle this situation before, well, BRICS gets established enough and really starts to make moves and everything? Because if that's the case, maybe America can actually get something off, but if they can't, this is going to be bad. Now, personally, I don't think BRICS is going anywhere. I mean, this is one of the big ways that the rest of the world is trying to fight back against that American hegemony, if that makes sense. So we're looking at a situation where, the East in particular, the quote-unquote enemies of America, are trying to find a way around, all of these problems. I mean, you got to think about like Russia, right? They invaded Ukraine, and they got pretty much cut off from the whole rest of the planet, right? The United States and its allies have sanctioned them into the fucking dirt. They've cut them off from the SWIFT system, so they can't really process a lot of international payments. Their economy hasn't done the best. It's contracted a little bit from my knowledge. All these countries, they don't want to continue that American dependence, if that makes sense. So there is a summit coming up in South Africa within an upcoming point in time, but there is a little bit of rumblings that might be a little bit bad for the expansion of BRICS. Now, apparently China is a little leery about expanding the alliance. It seems like the mentality of the BRICS alliance right now is to continue to expand, right? Get new member states in, continue building up that resistance against the American-led, power of the world. But the biggest member of BRICS, which is China, obviously, is a little leery about that entire plan, right? So obviously China has an absolute powerhouse economy, right? Like, they are by far the strongest country in BRICS right now, both militarily and economically, right? Their economy is really the only one that is on par to contend with like the United States and its allies. For them, expanding this alliance and continuing to bring in all these new member states, it doesn't necessarily benefit China as much as one might think, right? If they accept all these 19 new member states in, and I'm assuming the vast majority of them are not global powers by any stretch of the imagination, right? That basically now links China into dependence with a dozen plus new countries that realistically, yeah, it has some influence or control over, but now China becomes a little bit more dependent on them. I mean, their economy is exponentially larger than pretty much all of these countries that are going to try to join. It isn't really in China's best interest to have to kind of, if it makes sense, carry them through through this alliance, because realistically, that's kind of like what the US deals with in NATO. I mean, yeah, NATO is this big, massive, alliance and whatnot from North American and European countries and whatever, but the vast majority of the military firepower in that alliance is American. I mean, we are what makes NATO NATO. If America wasn't in NATO, NATO wouldn't be shit, if even existent in all reality, because, like I said, we're pretty much the ones backpacking that whole measure, and China doesn't really want to find themselves in the same boat. I mean, it's going to dilute their influence, it's going to make it harder for them to have control, and realistically, that's not what China's looking for. This alliance is meant to disrupt. It's meant to give them more control in the global craze of everything, right? So, as it stands right now, BRICS is, I would say, definitely an economic, of course, threat to the United States and its dominance around the world. They are attempting to knock the US dollar down a notch, understandably so. I hate to say it, I'm an American, but understandably so. But ultimately, we're going to have to really kind of see how this continues to play out. But this is something we will keep a look at here on the channel and continue to pay attention to as more news of this whole subject really starts to come out. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus subscribers. Your support helps the channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus. Well,